What's popping out? The OVO Sweatshop is a name that I don't know exactly where it originated. Akademiks popularized it, but I've seen people refer to OVO as a sweatshop multiple times before that. But it's used to refer to how Drake allegedly treats the signees on his record label. Many people believe they're just there to give him their best work and help him make music to elevate his own career, as opposed to doing what a label usually does and focusing on making each artist as successful as they possibly can. Nobody on OVO is anywhere near as popular as Drake, or even sell a tenth of what he sells, and all of his signees seemingly came out of nowhere. It's like OVO was a talent search. They scoured the internet for artists who were talented but unknown, and had zero funding, and they would sign them to work countless hours producing music that Drake would take credit for. OVO Sound was formed in 2012 by Drake, his best friend and main producer Noah Shabib, also known as 40, and his manager Oliver El-Khatib. It's under Warner Brothers, and where the first rumors of Drake using lesser-known artists came from would be Abel Tesfaye, or as we better know him, The Weeknd. Now, The Weeknd was never signed to OVO, which makes this all the more interesting because The Weeknd had songs popping off online and on MySpace before he had even showed his face. 3 songs that were released at the end of 2010 and early 2011 were Loft Music, The Morning, and What You Need. Drake put these up on a blog post of his and got them receiving media coverage from different blogs, but more importantly, it was what built their relationship. Drake wasn't the behemoth in the industry he is now at that point, but he was big. He was signed to Lil Wayne and had the success of the single Best I Ever Had, the EP So Far Gone, and his debut album Thank Me Later. The Weeknd would do performances around Toronto after the release of his classic project House of Balloons in March of 2011, one of which Drake showed up to and gave him the proposition of working on music together. He accepted, and Drake took him on tour, letting him open up for him, and during this time, he got a lot more popular in the mainstream audience. The Weeknd wasn't doing any interviews and just went to social media when he would release a new project, but in this time would be close to Drake and contribute to his second album, which many of his fans consider his best, Take Care. The Weeknd would be featured on Crew Love, but received credit for a handful more tracks. We wouldn't find out until years later, though, that The Weeknd had given half of his own album to Drake for Take Care, and it was stated that he contributed much more than what he was publicly credited for on that album. This all happened before OVO Sound was established, and what Drake thought would happen would be The Weeknd signing to him, but in a huge plot twist, The Weeknd signed to Republic Records and started his own label, XO. Drake fans at the time thought this was shady and messed up because of how much Drake did to build The Weeknd for him to just sign to a different label, but we've seen that it was the best thing he could have done. The Weeknd now rivals Drake in musical success and on the charts. He's a superstar, and nobody from the OVO camp even comes close. Majid Jordan would be signed to OVO in 2013. They first came to be widely known for their part on Drake's Nothing Was the Same album on the track Hold On We're Going Home. This was most people's first introduction to the duo, and finding music of theirs was difficult. Majid El-Mascati and Jordan Ullman were both studying at the University of Toronto. They met at a bar where Majid was celebrating his 21st birthday, where Jordan showed up and told him how he made music, and Majid had taken a break from making music, but he convinced them and they decided to link up and work on music at Jordan's dorm. They were under the name Good People on SoundCloud and released an EP, After Hours, that was discovered by 40 in the summer of 2012. 40 emailed Majid asking to meet, who was already back in Bahrain at the time. He graduated from school and he didn't know who he was, so he talked to his father, who looked him up and told Majid to take the opportunity. The OVO Sweatshop thing isn't an exaggeration though. Majid Jordan said while they were working on Nothing Was the Same, it was like a studio camp, with tents inside, and people flying in. They can't tell anybody what they're working on, nobody can leave. Majid would write the song Hold On, produced by Paul Jeffries, the same guy that produced Hotline Bling, and an important name in the OVO camp we'll get to later. Now this whole story just reads like a fantasy. Some Harry Potter or Game of Thrones type stuff. Every artist just dreams of releasing something on SoundCloud, and then one of the biggest producers in the game hits you up. But the question that's been stuck in my mind is, how the hell did 40 even find these guys? Were they buzzing in Toronto? They didn't have much material online either. This is a common theme that goes on in OVO and happens with most of their signees or people that they co-sign. The first artist though to be signed to OVO is Partynextdoor, another artist from Ontario, Canada, back in 2013. He would release his classic self-titled debut project under that moniker. Now, how he got there with such a polished project that sounds much different from his previous work is a hard story to make out entirely when it comes to the details. He was making music for a while and uploading it online, but under the name Jerron B, which is his real name, Jerron Braithwaite. He got a deal with Warner as a songwriter before he ever got signed to a deal, which we get no details on. I feel that's something many people would like to know, how it happens and the process behind it. But the way he got linked up to Drake was that one of his old producers, Jordan Evans, showed Party's music to producer Boy Wonder, who was on OVO, who forwarded the music to 40, and he liked it enough to show it to Drake. Partynextdoor's sound would be copied by people like Bryson Tiller, and to this day, he's still the most successful out of the OVO camp. He's had a #1 single that he wrote for Rihanna, Work, but he's also had spurts where he randomly alludes to being in a label situation he doesn't like, and that he's being used and should be a lot more popular than he is. There's some legitimacy to what he's saying. Perhaps he could be promoted more, but he's never anywhere that can keep his name talked about all the time. We know almost nothing about him. He avoids doing any interviews, don't know anything about his personality, and he's signed to Drake, so maybe his best music is given to him. The frustration seemed to be rising even more when he got enough of the money from writing hits and wanted to be the one that gets the credit and accolades in public too. This is a normal thing to seek as an artist, I'm guessing. Eventually the money isn't enough, but he probably looks at the success, say, Bryson Tiller is having, who had supposedly received offers from OVO, and The Weeknd, who he sees himself as being in their position. It's hard to gauge his feelings about his label situation because they're always changing. Drake knows how to keep his workers in line. That's one thing we know for certain. OVO loves to rebrand artists as well. Partynextdoor had a new name and his old music was removed from the internet, and it wasn't until later that it would resurface from the small number of people who put together that he was Jerron B, along with some funny conspiracy theory that thought he was lying about his age and he was 8 years older than he claims. OVO did the same thing when it came to Roy Woods, another artist from Ontario, Canada, Brampton to be precise, but later moved into Toronto. The first most of us heard about him was through the Exodus EP, while he was already signed to OVO and had a Drake feature on it. The first question is, where the hell did this kid, who was 18 at the time, come from? The first song, Drama, was played on OVO Sound Radio, and when everyone looked him up, there was nothing on his SoundCloud, and they had basically scrubbed his musical history from the internet as well. Roy was making music and only had a small buzz for many years. He was also a good football player, and the song that really got him on OVO's radar was the song Murder he did that he got Dej Loaf to feature on. He only had a manager at this time, and this song would catch the attention of Oliver, who hit up Roy Woods, and they would become friends, talking for months, until the talks of signing came up eventually, and Roy Woods jumped at the opportunity in 2015. Roy has never really said anything bad, negative, or even showed discontent at his career or what OVO was doing with his career. He's by no means a star, but his music is great, I like it, and he's had moderate success, and I don't know if he would be bigger elsewhere. Plaza is another weird case. Nobody even knew his identity for such a long time or what he looked like. I first found out about him through this Fader article where he premiered the song Personal. Apparently he had been releasing music one song at a time for his debut EP, One, and built a fan base off that, but that's so hard for me to believe. He didn't show his face, and apparently he had no connects, but in 1 year, with just a couple songs on SoundCloud, he was able to build up a big enough fan base that he was getting covered by Noisy, Complex, BuzzFeed, and Fader. He was signed and it was announced through OVO Sound Radio when they debuted his second EP, Shadow. He has some great music, but doesn't show his face or talk at all when it comes to social media. His music fits right into OVO, and if you enjoy any of that Toronto type of sound like Old Weekend and stuff, his music will appeal to you. Division. This duo is doing really well for themselves right now, and it takes us back to the producer I had mentioned earlier in the video, Paul Jeffries, also known as 1985. Their songs were getting huge buzz when With Me was played on OVO Sound Radio, and people were wondering how many people were in this group. Some thought it was 4, some said it was just one person, etc. But we would eventually find out it was 1985 and someone named Daniel Daly. Now, I don't know how the hell 1985 found Daniel Daly, and they're not too interested in doing interviews either and explaining how they met. But regardless, they're having success in R&B. Both projects, September 5th and Morning After, have charted high on the R&B charts. I really love the second project. And some are arguing that they're even the best in OVO right now. I Love Makonnen was an interesting case, to say the least, and it makes sense why he didn't last long there. First off, he was the only person who was signed to OVO that wasn't from Ontario, or even Canada, and he was very popular from his hit song Tuesday that Drake got on as a feature. His personality was really out there compared to all the other signees, and had a lot of complaints and eventually just got dropped from the label altogether. Drake probably just had enough of all the headlines he was bringing to his label, and the fact that he was a one-hit wonder, and just said, let's just get rid of him. Baka Not Nice is the artist I would say that Drake put the most effort into pushing forward. He's also not like the other signees and was Drake's bodyguard, close friend, and got done serving time recently. The first song we heard was his Live Up To My Name song, which took me by surprise. I didn't expect the song to be that good from someone who doesn't make music. Until we heard the reference track for it, and Drake basically just gave him that whole song. What a great gift to get when you come back home. A hit song. It's likely Drake has given him all of his music, which I don't think there's anything wrong with, but do we really believe that Drake has given anyone else a reference track that's signed to him? If anything, it's probably the exact opposite. They're probably giving him the songs that he has as hits. But even underneath the people who are signed are people like Quentin Miller, who we weren't even supposed to know about. Quentin Miller not only being the writer, but as we would later find out, giving reference tracks to a handful of songs on Drake's If You're Reading This It's Too Late album. Mo G, also another person who said he wrote for Drake, but there's no proof past the fact that Drake not only took one of his dance moves, but also shouted him out in a song. Ever since he talked about Drake the wrong way, we haven't heard a peep from Mo G. One thing is for certain is that Drake really has put on for Toronto. He's been shouting out and even chilling with a lot of the local Somali rappers, one of which was Mo G, and put a spotlight on their music scene that allowed me to find rappers like Plaza. A valid criticism that Drake's detractors have of him running his record label is that it's just a place where he signs very talented artists and uses them to continue to build and maintain his own career. He's not interested in the business aspect of building stars on the roster and profiting off of how well they do, just making sure he does well and his legacy is among the greats, which is why it hurt him so much that everybody doubts his lyrical ability since the ghostwriting incident was exposed. But OVO, the signed members at least, are very private with everything in their lives, and that's not what people like anymore. It's rare that a superstar is like that. The question becomes, does OVO attract people that are this private and prefer to just focus on the music? Are these types of musicians sought out by Oliver and 40? Or are they forced to become this way by the label so they can't ever outshine Drake? I would say it's probably the first two. The only person on their current roster that's even provided good interviews, if any interviews at all, is Roy Woods. But there is one counter-argument that's always been in my mind, and that's The Weeknd. He's a dull personality. He would have fit right into OVO. And he never does any interviews, but he's a superstar. Doesn't that nullify the notion that you need to do interviews or have a social media persona out there to be a successful artist? Well, yes and no. The Weeknd is probably the highest priority on his label. He's not signed to another artist, so there won't be that jealousy that's almost always there. Jay-Z, Drake, 50, most artists run labels are there to serve their own careers. And Rick Ross might have been the only exception to this, where he elevated everyone around him. Maybe Kanye West too, they've done good for themselves as well. But when we mention people like Birdman, the music was always secondary to him. He fell back real hard to focus on Wayne, Nicki, and Drake, and didn't care for the music as much as the business side. We need to be fair when it comes to our criticism as well. The Weeknd changed his sound and went pop. That's what allowed for a lot of the mainstream success he's having now. And when it comes to the OVO roster, they're on their own sound that's still more on the R&B side, but with their own style that's distinguishable from everyone else doing it. Perhaps if they went on a more pop sound, they would have success. But in their specific genre, they're almost running it, other than maybe Tory Lanez and Bryson Tiller. When people mention Rick Ross as being such a great label head and compare it to what Drake is doing, it isn't entirely fair because Ross has signed rappers. The only rapper that's signed to OVO right now, other than Drake, is Baka. And this past year and a half, he's been doing great. We've seen what Drake can do to catapult rappers' careers. He gave Blockboy JB a top 10 hit off the strength of his feature alone. Some might also say that Drake doesn't sign rappers because he doesn't want them to be his competition. Well, then I don't see why he would help people like Blockboy because he's not getting paid off of his career, as far as we know. At least the people, if he signs them, he'll be getting a cut out of all their future earnings. Another thing is our lack of information. Only P&D has had valid concerns and complaints when it comes to OVO. Makonnen was the only other one I know of that complained, and I didn't really take it that serious because he was garbage. But no OVO signees are complaining about money. P&D was saying the checks are good, he just wants the recognition. So maybe these artists that are signed, while they may possibly be creating all these hits for Drake, are being compensated very well for their service. And if that's the case, are they really in a sweatshop? I bet nobody listening here would turn down a job at a sweatshop if it meant getting paid a doctor's salary. But let me know what y'all think in the comments. Like and subscribe and hit that notification bell if you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Peace.